The Mount of Olives, one of the most sacred ridges on earth, is beginning to move. Subtle tremors at 4:14 a.m. Widening cracks. Strange lights seen at night. Water emerging near the Temple Mount, and ancient graves shifting on their own, all appearing at the exact location Zechariah foretold would split when the Lord returns. These signs are converging with breathtaking precision, echoing prophecies written 2,500 years ago. Tonight, we walk through eyewitness accounts, geological discoveries, supernatural manifestations, and ancient predictions side by side to see whether prophecy is now unfolding in real time. If this investigation impacts you, please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe so more people can see what is happening in Jerusalem right now. There are mountains that whisper, mountains that watch, and mountains that wait. But there is only one mountain on earth that carries a prophecy so explosive, so impossible, so precise, that even the ground beneath it seems to tremble with anticipation. The Mount of Olives is not just a ridge overlooking Jerusalem. It is a fault line between the seen and the unseen, between history and destiny, between what was written and what is about to unfold. For more than 2,000 years, its stones have held secrets. Its soil has absorbed the footsteps of kings, prophets, angels, and the Messiah himself. And now, as strange signs begin to ripple across its surface, the world is asking whether the ancient prophecy recorded in the book of Zechariah is awakening at last. To understand what is happening on this mountain today, we must return to the prophecy that has haunted theologians and scholars for centuries. Zechariah, writing around 520 BC, he described a future moment when the nations of the world would converge against Jerusalem, when darkness would fall at noon, when creation itself would shudder, and when the Lord would step once more onto the earth. But the heart of the prophecy is one breathtaking detail that has always transfixed believers and unnerved skeptics. The Mount of Olives will split in two, not metaphorically, not symbolically, physically. Zechariah wrote that the Messiah would place his feet on the Mount of Olives, and the mountain would tear apart along an east to west line, creating a vast valley that would reshape the landscape of Israel forever. Imagine it. A mountain that for thousands of years has stood unmoved, suddenly breaking open from the touch of divine presence. This is not imagery one forgets. This is not language found in poetry. This is the description of a geological event so violent, so unmistakable, that the entire world would feel its impact. Yet what makes this prophecy even more astonishing is where it is located. The Mount of Olives is more than biblical scenery. It is the place where Jesus prayed before his arrest, the place where he taught his disciples about the end of the age, the place where he wept over Jerusalem, and the place from which he ascended into heaven. According to the book of Acts, 2 angels appeared on this very mountain and declared that he would one day return in the same way he departed. The prophecy of Zechariah and the promise of Acts overlap like 2 layers of a divine map, both pointing toward this single ridge of pale limestone just east of the city. But why this mountain? Why not Zion, or Carmel, or Sinai? The answer is woven into the spiritual geography of Jerusalem itself. The Mount of Olives stands opposite the Temple Mount, divided only by the deep scar of the Kidron Valley. For ancient Israel, it was a threshold between the holy and the human. When Ezekiel saw the glory of God depart from the temple, he wrote that it stopped on the Mount of Olives before ascending. When King David fled from betrayal, he climbed this mountain barefoot, weeping. When the last great battle is described in the prophets, the final clash between darkness and light centers on this ridge. The Mount of Olives is the hinge of Jerusalem's destiny, the place where heaven touches earth. Throughout history, people have sensed that something sleeps beneath this mountain. Jewish tradition teaches that when the Messiah comes, the resurrection of the dead will begin on its slopes. That is why more than 150,000 tombs blanket its sides. Generations wanted to be buried here, believing they would be the first to rise when the Lord returns. Every stone, every grave, every tree tells the same story. Something world-changing is destined to happen at this place. For centuries, skeptics dismissed Zechariah's prophecy as poetic exaggeration. After all, how could a mountain simply split apart? What force could tear open the earth in such a dramatic line? Why specify east to west unless it was meant literally? Yet, as modern geology advanced, scientists discovered something remarkable beneath the Mount of Olives, a dormant fault line running exactly in the direction Zechariah described, a weakness in the mountain, a fracture waiting for pressure, a fault capable of doing precisely what the ancient prophet wrote. The Bible had marked the fault line 2.5 millennia before seismologists mapped it. Still, even with this discovery, the prophecy remained a distant mystery, until now. In recent years, subtle movements have begun to echo through the mountain. New cracks have appeared across old pathways. Stone slabs near ancient graves are shifting. Instruments have detected unusual pressure building beneath the ridge. And then came the signs that science cannot explain. The tremor at 14 inches the morning, the water emerging from the Temple Mount, the lights appearing on the slopes at night, the strange behavior of trees and tombs. It is as if the mountain is stirring, as if something beneath the surface is preparing, aligning, awakening. What makes all of this even more haunting is that none of these events seem random. They echo the language of prophecy. They mirror patterns described in Scripture. They occur at the very location tied to the Messiah's return. It is as though the mountain itself is responding to an approaching moment, like a drum tightening before the first strike. For thousands of years, believers have read Zechariah's words and wondered what that day would look like. Today, the question is no longer academic. Today, the mountain is giving hints, whispers, tremors, clues, and the world is watching. What we are witnessing may not be the fulfillment yet, but it feels like the unfolding, the beginning of something ancient, the shadow of a prophecy stepping into the light. And as we move deeper into this investigation, the puzzle pieces will only grow stranger, more breathtaking, and more impossible to ignore. Because the story of the Mount of Olives is not just a prophecy, it is a countdown, and the clock may have already begun. At exactly 4:14 a.m., Jerusalem found itself inside such a moment. A thin veil of night still cloaked the city. The streets slept. The olive trees along the ridge stood motionless. And then, without warning or sound, the ground beneath the Mount of Olives began to vibrate. Not violently, not like an earthquake tearing through stone. This tremor came like a whisper, a pulse, a heartbeat rising from the depths of the earth. Yet, it was strong enough to stop thousands of people in mid-step pilgrims returning from prayer, guards finishing their night watch, monks awakening before dawn, and residents who had risen early without knowing why. Each person felt the same sensation, a sudden stillness, followed by a trembling so delicate that it felt almost intentional, as though the mountain were responding to something unseen. Witness accounts are eerily consistent. People describe the ground shifting as if it were breathing, a soft wave passing beneath their feet, a pressure rising from below, sweeping through their bodies like a warm shiver. Many fell silent, unsure whether the earth was moving or their spirits were stirring. Others felt tears stream down their faces without knowing why. Some dropped to their knees, overcome by a presence they could not explain. And a few heard something that still haunts them. A voice, faint but unmistakable, speaking words they could not forget. Prepare, he is coming. At first, the tremor seemed like nothing more than an odd early morning disturbance. But its timing, 4:14 a.m., set off alarms across the world of biblical scholarship. Matthew 4:14 speaks of a great light rising for those in darkness. Zechariah 14 describes the Mount of Olives reacting to the presence of the Lord. To believers, the number 4:14 was more than a coincidence. It was a signature, a divine marker, a reminder that Scripture sometimes hides its messages in plain sight. What happened that morning, however, did not end with a tremor. Minutes later, several people reported seeing a faint glow rising from the ridge. Not a sunrise, not a lamp, not any kind of artificial light. It was a soft radiance hovering above the mountain, dissolving into the night like a mist of gold. Security cameras caught glimpses of moving shadows that did not match the silhouettes of trees or passing travelers. A few guards stationed at the nearby lookout point claimed they saw small points of light like fireflies, but brighter, gliding across the slope as though mapping invisible trails. Scientists were quick to offer explanations. Perhaps underground pressure caused the tremor. Perhaps atmospheric moisture created an optical illusion. Perhaps the lights were drones or reflections. Yet none of these answers satisfied those who experienced it firsthand. They knew what they felt. They knew the tremor was not random. It was purposeful. It carried weight, meaning, and it awakened something deep inside them, something ancient, something prophetic. In the days that followed, additional reports surfaced. Residents on the eastern side of the city described hearing soft hums at night, like distant horns vibrating through stone. Shepherds near Bethany claimed their animals behaved strangely, gathering near the foot of the mountain as though drawn to a hidden signal. A group of archaeologists camping near the Kidron Valley said they were awakened by a single flash of light that illuminated the entire hillside for less than a second, leaving no trace of its source. All of these events formed a pattern that scholars could not ignore. Something beneath the mountain was stirring again, just as it had in ancient times, when prophets wept, angels descended, and the Lord himself walked its slopes. It felt as though the Mount of Olives was remembering its destiny. For centuries, believers have wondered how the final moments described in Zechariah would begin. Would the mountain roar open without warning? Would the sky split before the earth did? Or would there be small signs, first quiet signals that the appointed hour was drawing near? The 4:14 tremor suggests the latter, a whisper before the thunder, a breath before the shout, a tremble before the split. And if this was merely the first sign, what comes next? Will the ground shake again? Will the lights return? Will the mountain reveal more secrets hidden beneath its centuries of silence? When geologists first began studying the Mount of Olives in earnest, they expected to find a stable limestone ridge like many others across the region. Instead, they discovered a puzzle. The mountain sits directly on the Dead Sea transform fault, one of the most restless geological scars in the Middle East. This fault has produced some of the most devastating earthquakes recorded in ancient history. But the truly unsettling discovery came in 1964, when engineers building the Seven Arches Hotel drilled into the ground and found something unexpected, an east-to-west fault line hidden beneath the surface. A fracture that matched, down to the compass direction, the very line Zechariah described thousands of years ago. For decades, the fault line remained mostly dormant. It shifted slightly, breathed occasionally, but nothing more. Then, in recent years, subtle changes began to accumulate, too slow for the average eye to detect, yet too consistent for scientists to ignore. Cracks that once looked harmless began widening. Stone slabs near the ancient graves on the western slope started tilting forward as though pushed by invisible hands. Footpaths that had remained unchanged for centuries now showed signs of buckling, sinking, or drifting out of alignment. Satellite imagery revealed something even stranger. A pressure zone had begun forming beneath the eastern ridge of the mountain, stretching in a curved line that mirrored the fault's pattern. The images showed deformation not caused by erosion or rainwater or human activity, but by deep subterranean stress, tension building like an unspoken warning waiting to break the silence. The crust beneath Jerusalem was shifting, tightening, preparing for something. No one could say when, but every new reading suggested the mountain was no longer at rest. Tour guides began noticing new fissures forming along the hiking path overlooking the Kidron Valley. Archaeologists working near the southern slope reported hearing low vibrations rumbling through the ground late at night, as if the earth were groaning in its sleep. Some dismissed it as trucks passing through distant roads, but the vibrations felt different, longer, deeper, resonating upward from the core of the mountain. It wasn't just the land that was changing. The environment itself began behaving strangely. During the hottest weeks of summer, unexpected pockets of cool air would seep through newly formed cracks in the rock. During winter rains, water pooled in unusual patterns, diverting toward the fault line rather than flowing downhill. Even wildlife seemed affected. Birds that once nested along the ridge migrated elsewhere. Small burrowing animals avoided areas they previously occupied, leaving entire patches of ground eerily silent. Geologists studying the Mount of Olives have warned for years that the region is overdue for a major earthquake. Some predict that the energy stored beneath the mountain is building toward a sudden release. Others believe the movement may occur gradually, a slow, creeping separation of the ridge. But there is one thing no scientist wants to say out loud. The mountain is behaving as though it is preparing for a structural change of unusual magnitude. Privately, a few researchers admit something even more disturbing. The patterns appearing beneath the Mount of Olives do not match normal earthquake precursors. They are too linear, too specific, too directional. They follow the same east to west axis prophesied in Zechariah 14:4. And while scientists do not speak in terms of prophecy, several have confessed that this alignment borders on impossible coincidence. Others believe the mountain is responding to invisible forces, stress triggered by deep geological shifts linked to the Dead Sea Basin. But even those explanations fall short when confronted with the odd timing of the events. The sudden tremor at 4:14, the rising pressure zone, the cracks mirroring ancient scripture, the subtle reshaping of footpaths, the presence of light anomalies at night. Each phenomenon is strange enough on its own. Together, they form a pattern that feels less like natural coincidence and more like a countdown. Local residents sense it too. Taxi drivers warn that certain areas feel different underfoot. Gardeners tending the olive trees speak of hearing faint pops or muffled cracks within the soil, like bones settling. Few want to voice what they truly feel. But in quiet conversations whispered in cafes, temples, and homes, the same idea returns again and again. The mountain is awakening. And if the mountain is moving, what does it mean for the prophecy? For centuries, scholars believed the splitting of the Mount of Olives would require a catastrophic earthquake. Yet the more we learn about this ridge, the more plausible the prophecy becomes. The fault line exists. The pressure is rising. The cracks are spreading. And the land is behaving as though something enormous, maybe even supernatural, is influencing it. In all of Jerusalem, no location is studied more carefully than the Mount of Olives. Archaeologists, seismologists, and theologians share an unspoken understanding. Whatever happens next will not be small. And that raises a single haunting question. Are we witnessing the quiet prelude to a moment the world has waited thousands of years to see? For generations, people living around the Mount of Olives have spoken in hushed tones about strange visitations, shadows that move when the wind is still, whispers drifting across the valley at night, lights shifting among the trees. But never had they witnessed anything like what unfolded in recent months. The tremor awakened the land, the water stirred ancient stone, and then something even more extraordinary happened. The veil seemed to thin, the unseen became visible, and the people who lived there, ordinary shopkeepers, night guards, elderly residents who walked the ridge every morning, began reporting encounters that defied explanation. The first testimonies came from residents along the southern slope overlooking the ancient graves. Several individuals described seeing tall figures standing among the tombs shortly before dawn. These were not silhouettes shaped by shifting fog or stray light. The figures were luminous, radiating a soft brilliance that made the surrounding stones glow faintly. One elderly man who had lived his entire life in the area said that the beings stood motionless at first, like sentinels, and then turned their faces toward the city as though listening to a voice carried on the wind. He insisted they were angels. He used the word without hesitation, without searching for another explanation. People living near the Garden of Gethsemane reported something even more profound. On a quiet night just after the tremor, a faint choir-like sound drifted across the olive trees, pure and layered like harmonies from a distant realm. A few residents stepped outside, expecting to find a group of worshippers singing in the garden. Instead, they found the space empty, except for a soft glow moving gently across the branches, illuminating them from above. Several witnesses described seeing shapes within the light forms, with wings folded behind them, descending and rising as if carried by an invisible current. These were not hallucinations or fleeting tricks of the imagination. The descriptions were too consistent, too detailed, too grounded. Some watchers said the beings stood several meters tall, their wings arched like living architecture. Others spoke of robes flowing without wind, made of light rather than fabric. And some insisted that the angels were not merely present, but engaged in activity, watching the mountain, observing the city, waiting for something. But the most astonishing accounts came from those who witnessed something far beyond the presence of angels. In a narrow corridor of the valley between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount, several residents reported seeing a radiant figure standing above the descent toward the Kidron stream. This figure did not drift or hover like the angels. It stood firm, rooted, unshakable, emanating a brilliance that washed across the valley floor like dawn breaking early. Witnesses described the light as alive, breathing, speaking without words. And though the figure's face was too bright to discern, many recognized instantly who it must be. They said it was the Lord, not a symbolic vision, not a dream, a physical manifestation too powerful for the mind to deny. One middle-aged woman who lived in a small stone house nearby said she felt her knees buckle the moment she saw the figure. She described a weight upon her chest, not painful but overwhelming, as though every buried sorrow had surfaced all at once and dissolved in the brilliance before her. Another man said he tried to speak but found himself unable to move his tongue. He could only watch as the radiant figure lifted a hand toward the Mount of Olives, and the very air around the trees seemed to vibrate. Unlike the angels, whose presence carried a sense of gentle watchfulness, the appearance of the Lord carried something else: authority, a presence that commanded reverence simply by existing. The testimonies share one striking detail. When the figure appeared, the wind stopped. Every leaf froze. Even the ever-present city sounds fell away until silence ruled the valley, a silence deeper than anything the residents had ever experienced. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, not by fading but by withdrawing in a single instant, as if stepping back into a realm beyond sight. Nothing remained except the lingering warmth in the air and the trembling hearts of those who had seen him. Local authorities tried to dismiss the reports as misinterpretations of light or atmospheric effects, but the people refused to be silenced. Those who encountered the angels or the Lord spoke with a certainty that could not be faked. Their voices shook. Their eyes filled with tears even weeks later. Many of them were not religious before this. Some had never prayed in their lives, yet all agreed on one truth: the supernatural had touched the mountain again. As word spread through the community, something changed in the atmosphere around the Mount of Olives. Families began gathering at dusk in silence. Shopkeepers stepped outside in the early hours of the morning, looking toward the ridge as though expecting another visitation. And though the appearances did not repeat in the same dramatic form, residents reported an unmistakable sense that the beings had not departed completely. The valley felt watched, protected, prepared. If the tremor was the awakening and the water was the message, then the visitation was the confirmation. Something divine had moved across the Mount of Olives, something no one could deny, something no one could forget. And the people who lived there understood what it meant. They whispered it quietly, afraid to speak it aloud. The prophecy was no longer distant. The king was drawing near. As Jerusalem wrestled with the tremor, the water, and the light, the Mount of Olives began revealing quieter mysteries, phenomena so subtle yet so unmistakably symbolic that many residents felt a chill each time they stepped outside their doors. These were not random disturbances. They were signs touching the deepest roots of the mountain's spiritual identity, unfolding in the very places tied to resurrection, judgment, and divine visitation. The first whispers came from the cemetery. The Mount of Olives holds one of the oldest and most sacred burial grounds in the world, a sea of pale stones stretching down the slope in rows that have not shifted for centuries. More than 150,000 souls rest there, waiting for the moment foretold in Jewish tradition, the moment the Messiah stands upon the mountain and the dead rise first from these very tombs. For thousands of years, the stones remained still, enduring wind, war, and time itself. But recently, something began to change. Locals walking the cemetery paths early in the mornings noticed subtle misalignments. At first, it seemed trivial, one stone slightly tilted, another leaning forward. Then came reports of cracks appearing overnight in tomb covers that had remained sealed for generations. A few graves showed signs of sinking on one side, as though something beneath the ground was shifting without disturbance above. The most unsettling cases involved tomb lids lifting just enough to reveal the dark opening beneath. Families who visited their ancestors' graves were the first to raise alarms. They insisted the stones had not been damaged by storms or construction. Some had visited only weeks earlier and found everything intact. Now the lids sat uneven, displaced by forces no one could explain. The caretakers of the cemetery acknowledged the strange activity quietly, noting the absence of erosion or water damage. It was as though the ground itself had moved with purpose, lifting and shifting selected tombs in a pattern invisible to the eye. What unnerved residents most was not the physical change, but the symbolism. These graves represent the hope of resurrection, the promise of the final awakening. In tradition, when the Lord returns to stand upon the Mount of Olives, the dead buried here will be the first to rise. So when stones opened, not broken, not shattered, but gently displaced as though by a careful hand, whispers spread quickly through the neighborhood. Was the mountain preparing for something? Was this a stirring beneath the earth, a trembling not of rock but of destiny? Even those who are not religious felt the weight of it. One resident described walking past a newly shifted tomb and feeling a sudden rush of cold air around his ankles, as though something had brushed past him unseen. Another said she heard a faint knocking sound near a partially opened grave, a rhythmic tapping that stopped the moment she stepped closer. She did not dare investigate further, yet the strange activity in the cemetery was only the beginning. As spring approached, the Garden of Gethsemane, home to olive trees estimated to be over 2,000 years old, began displaying behavior that defied agricultural understanding. These ancient trees, twisted with age and rooted in soil soaked with history, normally produce a single harvest of olives each year. It has been so for centuries, with a cycle as predictable as the rising sun. But then something extraordinary happened. The trees bore fruit again. Farmers tending the grove discovered fresh clusters of olives emerging only weeks after the previous harvest, a second wave of fruit on branches that should have been dormant. The phenomenon was not isolated. Several trees, some older than recorded kingdoms, began producing a second crop with remarkable consistency. Agricultural specialists were puzzled. 2 harvests in a single season is exceedingly rare for olive trees, especially ones of such ancient age. But these trees seemed untouched by normal limitations, responding instead to some hidden rhythm in the land itself. Theologians were quick to recognize the symbolism. In prophetic language, a double harvest is not simply an agricultural anomaly. It represents a dual gathering, a preparation for the final ingathering of souls. A sign of urgency, of readiness, of divine acceleration. Many called it the double harvest sign, a quiet but unmistakable signal that the mountain was aligning with spiritual patterns long foretold. Visitors to the garden reported an unusual atmosphere surrounding the trees during the second harvest. Some said the leaves shimmered in the sun with a silver glow that lingered longer than usual. Others described the fruit as unusually fragrant, carrying a scent that reminded them of oil used in ancient anointing rituals. The workers harvesting the unexpected olives admitted feeling a strange mixture of joy and unease, as though participating in a moment larger than themselves. And still, the mountain was not finished. Night after night, residents began witnessing lights moving across the slopes. Small, bright spheres that drifted between the tombs, danced among the olive branches, or glided along the paths without casting shadows. These were not headlights or flashlights or drones. Their movements were too fluid, too deliberate. They traveled silently, glowing with a soft golden hue that pulsed like a heartbeat. People watching from the rooftops said the lights appeared most often in the darkest hours before dawn. Sometimes they moved singly, sometimes in pairs, weaving patterns across the mountain as though tracing ancient routes long forgotten by humans. A few described the lights rising from the ground itself, emerging from the soil and lifting into the air before disappearing into the night sky. One man who lived near the cemetery said he saw a light pause above a partially opened tomb before drifting upward like a soul departing. A woman walking home late saw two lights circling each other above the garden, moving in perfect synchrony before fading near the ridge where the 8-day beacon had recently shone. Authorities attempted to explain the phenomenon as reflections from distant towers or passing aircraft, but the residents shook their heads. They had seen the lights too closely, too clearly. They knew instinctively these were not man-made. They carried intention, intelligence, presence. Some called them ministering spirits. Others believed they were signs of angelic watchfulness. A few, speaking in hushed voices, wondered if the lights represented the awakening of the souls buried beneath the mountain, echoes of the coming resurrection, glimpses of life stirring in the realm just beyond human sight. Together, these signs, the shifting graves, the double harvest, the dancing lights, formed a tapestry too intricate to ignore. They were not dramatic like earthquakes or blazing fire from the sky. They were quiet, subtle, intimate. Signs meant for those who watch closely, who understand the language of prophecy written not only in words but in the mysterious behavior of the land itself. The Mount of Olives was no longer just trembling, it was responding, breathing, signaling, and each sign pointed to a truth that was becoming harder and harder to deny. Something sacred was awakening beneath the mountain. Something ancient was preparing to rise. Something long foretold was beginning to take shape. And the world, knowingly or not, was being drawn deeper into the unfolding prophecy. For centuries, Jerusalem's stone walls have absorbed the prayers of millions, but beneath the ancient city lies a silence older than any human voice, a silence waiting for something, a silence prophesied long before the first temple ever stood. That silence broke the day water began to flow where no water should exist. It began quietly. A pilgrim visiting the Western Wall noticed a damp streak running between two massive stones, cool and shining in the morning light. At first, she assumed it was leftover rainwater, but rain had not touched Jerusalem for days. By noon, others saw it too. Small beads of moisture glistening like tears pressed from ancient granite. A thin stream traced its way downward, gathering at the base of the wall before slipping into the cracks of the pavement. Soon, whispers began spreading through the crowd. No one had ever seen the stones behave this way. Within hours, videos surfaced online showing water pooling near the southern corner of the Temple Mount, as if rising from within the mound itself. A rabbi who had served there for decades stood motionless, watching the stones glisten, his hands trembling. He later said the moment reminded him of Ezekiel's vision when water began flowing from the threshold of the temple, turning into a river that brought life to everything it touched. But this was not just water. Witnesses described it as unusually clear, cold, and moving with purpose, as though guided from within the rock rather than pushed by gravity. Some swore the air around the flow felt charged, like static electricity humming through the stone. Others sensed warmth radiating from the wall, though the stones were shaded from the sun. The most haunting detail came from a group of young students visiting Jerusalem for the first time. They recorded a strange sound near the flow, a soft vibration echoing behind the wall, something that resembled distant singing or the low hum of a shofar. Their phones captured only fragments, but enough to raise questions. Could sound be resonating from deep beneath the mount? Or was something else, something unseen, stirring in the foundations of the city? Theories flooded in. Engineers claimed underground water channels from ancient times might have reopened. Archaeologists wondered whether forgotten cisterns were shifting due to seismic pressure. But those who know the scriptures saw something different. They remembered the prophecy of Zechariah, where living waters would flow out of Jerusalem in the last days, parting toward the eastern and western seas. They remembered Joel's words, describing a fountain emerging from the house of the Lord. They remembered Ezekiel's river, starting as a trickle, becoming a flood, transforming deserts into gardens. And here, before their eyes, a trickle had begun. Over the next week, the phenomenon intensified. Several points around the Temple Mount began showing signs of moisture where no plumbing existed, where no springs had ever been recorded. The platform's stones appeared darker in irregular patterns, as though water traveled beneath them. Even more unsettling, water flowed uphill in certain places, defying natural physics. A geologist who studied the footage admitted he had no explanation. The stones, he said, seemed to sweat. Meanwhile, religious leaders across Israel released statements calling the event a sign of spiritual awakening. Some claimed the tears of the Temple Mount symbolized divine sorrow. Others believed it was preparation for purification, as water in Scripture often precedes moments of judgment or renewal. For many, however, the phenomenon meant something even more profound. The mountain was responding. The land itself was echoing the tremor from the Mount of Olives, as though both sacred sites were communicating through earth and stone. Eyewitnesses described how people reacted emotionally. Tourists wept without knowing why. Elderly worshippers pressed their faces to the damp stones, whispering prayers they had not spoken in decades. Even skeptics said they felt something unusual in the atmosphere, a heaviness, a reverence, a trembling beneath the soul more than the skin. Not long after, another strange event occurred. Small streams formed temporarily along the Kidron Valley after a light rain that should not have produced runoff. Instead of flowing eastward as usual, the streams split in two directions, one moving east toward the Dead Sea, the other bending unnaturally westward toward the city. Locals stood watching in disbelief. It was as though water itself had remembered an ancient pattern long described in prophecy but never seen in reality. Then came the testimonies from nighttime visitors who said they witnessed a faint blue glow near the base of the Temple Mount where the water appeared. The glow pulsed, dimming and brightening as if breathing. Guards reported hearing soft footsteps behind the wall, though no one was there. Several claimed they felt a sudden pressure in the air, like walking into a charged storm. And yet, despite all this, officials could not identify the source of the water. No broken pipes, no overflowing cisterns, no leakage from the city system. Some began suggesting the impossible, that the water was rising from deeper strata, unbeknownst to modern mapping, from channels older than any recorded infrastructure. Others whispered of something even more ancient, a return, a preparation, a shifting of the spiritual landscape beneath the physical one. If the tremor at 4:14 was the mountain awakening, then the water at the Temple Mount was its first message. A signal, a reminder, a call for the world to pay attention. For those who understand prophecy, it was not the size of the flow that mattered, it was the timing. The mountain shook, then the water came. Just as Ezekiel described, just as Joel foresaw, just as Zechariah warned. And this is only one of the signs appearing across Jerusalem. If you're feeling the weight of these revelations, stay with me. What comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about this city, this prophecy, and this moment in history. There are lights that fade with the sunrise. There are lights that flicker and die. And then there are lights that do not belong to this world at all. The phenomenon began on a cold evening when the city was settling into its ordinary rhythm. As darkness draped itself over the domes and rooftops of Jerusalem, a soft radiance rose above the horizon, glowing just beyond the crest of the Mount of Olives. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but those who saw it felt something unusual in their chest, a tightening, a stirring, as though their spirits recognized the light before their minds did. What made this radiance so astonishing was not merely its beauty, but its persistence. It did not shift. It did not behave like the beams of a drone, a lantern, or a passing aircraft. Instead, it hovered in perfect stillness, as though suspended by intention rather than physics. Hours passed, and the glow remained. Then an entire night, then another. By the third evening, residents across Jerusalem had begun to gather on balconies, streets, and rooftops, silently watching the mysterious light that refused to vanish. The phenomenon lasted 8 full nights. This detail shook scholars and theologians alike. 8 days is the exact duration of the Hanukkah miracle, the festival of dedication, the ancient sign of divine intervention. Yet this was no candle flame, no reflection of menorahs shining from windows. This was a solitary beacon fixed above the mountain, foretold in prophecy, a light that neither wind nor time could extinguish. Witnesses described it as a pale gold glow edged with white fire. When clouds drifted near, they illuminated softly, as though touched by the radiance. Birds avoided the region entirely during those nights, veering sharply away as if encountering an invisible barrier. Cameras struggled to focus on it, producing footage that looked almost alive, pulsing with slow, deliberate waves of brightness. But the most extraordinary testimonies came from those who ventured closer to the ridge. Several residents living near the upper slopes reported feeling warmth on their skin when they stepped outside, even though the air was cold. Others said the light caused the olive trees to shimmer, their leaves trembling with a silvery sheen that disappeared by morning. A local priest claimed that as he approached the ridge at midnight, he felt a sudden stillness descend over his body, like entering a room filled with reverence. When asked what the light looked like, he hesitated before speaking. "It looked," he said quietly, "like a signal, not a sign born of human hands, not a warning of danger, but a summons, gentle, beckoning, ancient." Theories arose quickly. Some scientists speculated it might be a rare atmospheric phenomenon. Others argued it was an optical reflection caused by temperature shifts. But none of these explanations could account for 8 consecutive nights of identical luminosity, unmoving, unchanging, suspended at the same exact point on the mountain. None could explain the warmth, the pulsing rhythm, or the sense of presence described by hundreds of witnesses. Theologians, however, recognize the pattern immediately. In Scripture, light is not a symbol of coincidence. It is a language, a message, a manifestation. The pillar of fire that led Israel, the brilliance that surrounded the shepherds, the radiance that shone at the resurrection, the glow that blinded Saul on the road to Damascus. Light is the signature of divine intervention, the mark of moments when heaven touches earth. So what did it mean for such a light to hover over the Mount of Olives? What did it signify when the glow refused to fade until the 8th night, the number of new beginnings, the symbol of God's eternal covenant? As the nights passed, something changed in the hearts of the people who watched. They reported sensing invitations rising quietly in their minds, invitations to return to faith they once abandoned, to seek answers they had long avoided, to soften hearts hardened by years of silence and struggle. The light did not speak in words, yet it communicated without sound. It stirred the hidden places of the soul, awakening a longing many had forgotten how to feel. On the 8th night, just before dawn, the radiance pulsed with unusual strength, as though gathering itself for a final act, and then vanished in an instant. Not slowly, not gradually. It disappeared the way a door closes between worlds. Silence followed. A silence so deep that even the birds hesitated to break it. Everyone who had witnessed the 8-day phenomenon felt the same truth settle inside them. Something had been announced. Something had been marked. Something had begun. The mountain had already shaken. Water had begun to flow. Angels had appeared. And now a celestial light had crowned the ridge for 8 nights, as if marking a countdown only heaven understood. What comes next is not speculation. It is convergence, patterns aligning with prophecy, signs gathering with purpose. And the world, knowingly or not, is being drawn toward a moment foretold thousands of years ago. If this journey is opening your eyes, please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe. There are moments in history when events do not stand alone. They echo each other. They answer each other. They pull together like threads woven into a single design that has been waiting centuries to reveal itself. For those watching Jerusalem closely, the signs on the Mount of Olives no longer appear as isolated mysteries. The tremor, the water, the visions, the light, the shifting graves, the fruit-bearing trees, the drifting orbs, each phenomenon stunned the city on its own. But something far more extraordinary is happening now. The events are beginning to converge. It began when scholars, scientists, and residents, all from different backgrounds and beliefs, noticed that every sign seemed to originate from a single axis, a single fault, a single prophetic center. It was as though invisible lines were being drawn across the landscape, connecting the Temple Mount to the Mount of Olives, the sky to the earth, the living to the dead, the natural to the supernatural. Even those who did not believe in prophecy felt uneasy, sensing that these phenomena were syncing with an unsettling precision. The tremor awakened the land, the water stirred the stone, the angels and the Lord appeared, the light crowned the mountain, the tombs shifted, the trees responded, the lights moved. And all of this occurred within a narrow span of time, in the precise locations described in the writings of prophets who lived and died thousands of years ago. The city was no longer experiencing random wonders, it was witnessing a pattern. What made the convergence undeniable was not the scale of each sign, but how they mirrored ancient descriptions. The tremor resonated with Zechariah's vision of the mountain preparing to split. The water connected to Ezekiel's river of life, flowing from the holy precincts. The light echoed prophetic imagery of the arrival of glory. The movement in the cemetery reflected resurrection promises. The double harvest whispered of final gathering. And the lights dancing along the slope resembled biblical accounts of ministering spirits moving before great divine intervention. The mountain was behaving as though responding to a single command spoken in a realm beyond human hearing. Even scientists, reluctant to enter theological territory, admitted the timing was uncanny. Geological instruments recorded subtle pressure spikes days after the light phenomenon ended, suggesting the land itself was reacting. Meteorological specialists struggled to explain why the temperature near the eastern slope shifted slightly at night, as though the ground emitted a faint warmth. Botanists studying the olive trees found no environmental catalyst for the second harvest. And technicians reviewing footage of the nightlights confirmed there was no drone activity, no lasers, no reflective surfaces that could replicate the movements captured on camera. The deeper experts investigated, the more the data refused to fit into ordinary explanations. Instead, the evidence seemed to align itself closer to the very texts many had dismissed as allegory. Meanwhile, ordinary residents felt the convergence in their bodies, their dreams, their emotions. Several people living near the eastern ridge reported waking up at the same hour each night, feeling an overwhelming urge to look toward the mountain. They described a sensation of being watched, not in fear, but with anticipation, as though something was waiting for permission to reveal itself fully. Others felt drawn to walk along the valley at dawn, sensing the atmosphere vibrate faintly, like a held breath. A few spoke of unusual clarity, moments when thoughts sharpened and insights surfaced uninvited, as if the mountain itself was whispering truths long buried beneath its stones. Even the animals reacted differently. Shepherds near Bethany said their flocks gathered facing the ridge without explanation. Birds avoided the center of the slope, flying in wide arcs around a particular area, creating a strange gap in their migration paths. Everywhere, patterns formed, patterns that pointed toward a single reality. Something was synchronizing the natural world with the supernatural, the present with the ancient, the visible with the invisible. One evening, a group of scholars gathered near the cemetery, overlooked to discuss the overlapping phenomena. As they debated, the sky above the Mount of Olives shifted into an unusual gradient, dark blue at the edges, strangely luminous at the center. It lasted only minutes, but everyone present fell silent, their voices swallowed by the weight of the moment. Later, one scholar admitted he had spent his life teaching prophecy as metaphor, but seeing the mountain respond the way it had shattered his assumptions. "It feels," he whispered, "like the land remembers something we have forgotten. This convergence is not subtle anymore. It is a symphony building toward a final note. Each sign is a separate instrument: tremor, water, light, visitation, resurrection imagery, harvest imagery, spiritual activity. Alone they are mysterious. Together they form a message too coherent to ignore. Jerusalem itself seems transformed by it. Tourists come seeking answers. Residents speak softly, with reverence, as if afraid to disturb whatever is happening. Some fear what the signs may predict. Others feel a strange peace, as though witnessing a promise being written into reality. But the greatest question now rising across the city, across the world, across every heart paying attention, is this: If the signs are aligning so clearly, what are they aligning toward? Zechariah spoke of a moment when the Lord steps onto the Mount of Olives, and the mountain responds with a split so powerful it reshapes the land. A moment when light, judgment, water, and resurrection converge on the same holy ground. A moment when the world changes forever. For centuries, readers imagined this event as distant, mythic, unreachable. But the convergence unfolding now makes that moment feel closer, not as a legend, but as a coming reality. We have reached the threshold where signs no longer ask for interpretation. They demand acknowledgement. The mountain is preparing, the land is aligning, the signs are speaking, and everything points to one final question. The question that will define the next chapter of this unfolding mystery. Across Jerusalem, a subtle shift in consciousness has taken hold. People who once passed the mountain without a second glance now linger at its edges, drawn by an intuition they cannot explain. Guides who have repeated the same stories for years now pause mid-sentence, aware that the familiar narratives no longer feel complete. Even skeptics, who once dismissed every unusual report as superstition, speak more quietly now, lowering their voices as though careful not to disturb whatever stirs in the unseen. Everywhere, there is a sense that the ordinary rules are no longer operating with the same certainty. The mountain feels watchful, not restless, not chaotic, watchful. It is as though it is holding something in reserve, waiting for a signal that has not yet been given, but is approaching. That waiting has produced a strange tension in the atmosphere, a sense that the world is moving toward an event that will not ask for permission when it arrives. Historians often say that great turning points are only visible in hindsight, yet something about the Mount of Olives defies that rule. Its signs do not whisper of the past, they lean toward the unfulfilled. They lean toward a moment the earth has not yet experienced, but seems increasingly prepared to receive. And what unsettles scholars the most is how the mountain's behavior aligns not with current events, but with ancient descriptions of what must come afterward. The convergence does not merely match prophecy, it anticipates its fulfillment. That anticipation is visible in subtle human reactions. In late-night conversations between scholars who rarely agree, but now find themselves united in curiosity. In the journals of researchers who speak of anomalous coherence, a term describing unrelated events that somehow move in sync. In the prayers whispered by people who had not prayed in years, but now feel compelled without knowing why. But perhaps the most revealing shift is emotional. Residents closest to the mountain describe an increasing sense of imminence, not born of fear or superstition, but of clarity, an unshakable awareness that the world is moving toward a juncture where something must be revealed. It is the same feeling one experiences just before a long-awaited visitor arrives, when the house grows quiet, when every sound becomes sharper, when the air itself seems to listen. This sense of imminence does not depend on signs. It exists independently, like a melody that people recognize even before hearing the first note. It is a resonance, a vibration across the spirit, reminding humanity of something it once knew but forgot as centuries passed. The Mount of Olives is awakening that memory. And this awakening raises a profound question. What happens when prophecy and reality no longer run parallel but begin to intersect? What happens when symbolic language becomes geographic coordinates? When ancient visions become present-day observations? When spiritual promises begin leaving physical footprints? Such a moment forces the world to confront possibilities long dismissed as myth, not because belief has changed, but because the evidence is moving closer, narrowing the gap between imagination and unfolding truth. The truth is this: the Mount of Olives is no longer simply a place, it has become an indicator, a barometer of approaching change. And the change it signals is not transitional, but transformational. It suggests a future in which political boundaries, historical narratives, and human assumptions will crumble under a greater reality. A reality in which the world will no longer ask, "Is prophecy real?" but instead, "How do we live inside it?" Across the city, across the world, something deeper is stirring. People awaken from dreams they cannot explain. Families speak of sudden insights or overwhelming emotions when looking toward Jerusalem. Children describe visions of light. Elders feel a pull to reconcile, to return, to prepare. These are not dramatic encounters, most are quiet, private moments that carry a weight disproportionate to their simplicity. Yet together, they form another layer of convergence. Not signs in the land, but signs in the human heart. This is perhaps the most important indicator of all. Prophecy does not unfold only in earthquakes or celestial signs. It unfolds in the interior world of the human soul, and something in that inner world is waking up, aligning itself with the movement of the mountain. The Mount of Olives is responding to something approaching. Human hearts are responding to something approaching. The question is no longer whether something is coming. The question is whether we are standing at the edge of the moment Zechariah saw. A moment when the world will no longer be divided by belief or disbelief, but by readiness. The closing of this chapter does not bring answers. Instead, it forms a doorway, one that leads into the unknown with a clarity that is both humbling and electrifying. What lies beyond that doorway is not yet visible, but the light leaking from its edges tells us one truth with absolute certainty. The Mount of Olives is preparing for an event unlike anything the world has ever witnessed. If this journey has opened your eyes, please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe. Thank you for standing with me as we witness prophecy awakening on the Mount of Olives. Ashen hak, kole amthan guk at, bhttps://www.youtube.com/watch, $V =, Zechariah 3.1 to 3.5. https://www.youtube.com/watch $V =, QGGPS size phi 13.4 to 13.9.